So, good morning, and today we are with a cheese artisan that calls herself the Cheese Lady. Could you introduce yourself and a little bit more about your company?
Hi, Martin. It's a pleasure to be here with you today and to chat to you cheese and all things related. My name is Svetlana, and I'm the founder of the Cheese Lady. We are a multi-award winning retailer of fine cheese. We're based in Scotland. We have two stores and an online store. And my career in cheese goes back 20 years. So I've been doing this for a long time. So hopefully I have a lot of good information to share with your listeners, and ask me anything you'd like about cheese today. I'm ready for it.
Yes. I mean, the thing is that that I've been looking at your storefront, and there's a lot of cheeses, and I think most people will get a bit concerned about what type of cheese to purchase. So, could you tell me the groups of cheeses that there are, and maybe we should go through them one by one, your recommendations and potentially particular pairings that you would have with that particular cheese?
Absolutely. Let's get our kind of vocabulary and our understanding of cheese as clear as possible, because I think it's really, really important for the enjoyment of cheese when you know what you're looking for. So you mentioned our selection. This is actually our smaller selection in our North Berwick store, which has a slightly smaller selection than our main store in Haddington, where we stock over 100 different cheeses. But our speciality at the Cheese Lady is farmhouse and artisan cheese. And that is in contrast to mass-produced industrial cheeses. So there are quite a few kind of peculiarities and details, but broadly speaking, farmhouse and artisan cheese, if you ask me, is the more flavorsome variety, the one that's better for you. It's all about the fantastic milk, welfare of the animals. It's made by artisans, so by skilled people rather than machines.
Mhm.
It's matured to perfection, so the flavor is really allowed to develop over time for every particular variety of cheese. It's full of nutritious goodness, so all the vitamins and minerals remain in the milk and remain in the cheese during the
Yes.
cheese making process. And therefore, when we enjoy that kind of cheese, it's really good for you, of course, in balance and moderation. And lastly, the cheeses that we deal with, so the farmhouse and artisan cheeses, they have terroir, which is a concept that we are borrowing from wine. You may have heard of terroir in wine. And that's really to say that these cheeses have a character of the place where they come from.
Yes, yes.
I hope that makes sense. So in contrast to the mass-produced cheeses, all of these farmhouse and artisan cheeses are really, really good for you. They're fascinating, they're beautiful and delicious.
So, should we start with soft cheeses? What are your recommendations and any pairings that you would suggest?
Oh gosh, I think that could be a whole podcast of its own.
Well, I mean, maybe you could go with your favorites or the favorites of your clients.
Absolutely. I probably would have to go a little bit of both, because all of my cheeses are my babies and they are kind of my favorites. But it depends really on the wine. And this is exactly where I'd like to maybe start, usually when making a pairing. But when it comes to the different varieties of cheese that we stock within that farmhouse and artisan family, like you say, there are soft ones, and soft ones can be different to each other as well. So there's the brie styles, there's the smelly ones, there's the triple cream ones, the ones that are really nice and rich, and then enriched with cream. So there's a world to explore. Like I say, there's probably too much to cover in a short space of time. But what I would generally say to people who are looking for soft cheese, go and speak to your cheesemonger and just let them know what you like and what you don't like, whether you want it to be smelly or whether you want it to be gooey, or would you like it to be moussey. So there are different kind of nuances that are available. But let's say if I were to suggest no fail, kind of foolproof pairing for our cheese lovers today. One of my absolute all-time favorites is having a triple cream cheese. So something like Délices de Crémier, which we stock. And that's a brie style cheese that's enriched with cream. It makes it buttery, makes it luscious, and absolutely amazing, just kind of melts in your mouth. And I love to pair it with sparkling drinks like champagne,
Yes.
or cava or prosecco. The reason why this pairing works is because the bubbles and the acidity of the wine really cut through the richness of the cheese, and they lift the texture up and just kind of makes it all beautiful on your palate. So that's a sure pairing for me every time.
And is there a particular pairing with fruit with that particular cheese, or?
With that particular cheese, what else would I have? I would probably have dry fruit rather than fresh fruit, just a bit, bring a little bit of sweetness because we don't want to make it too sharp.
Yeah.
So yes, something, perhaps apricots and things like that. Nuts, obviously walnuts, pecans would be a nice combination. We stock biscuits called Toast for Cheese, and they have dry fruits and nuts in them. They're quite easy to find in the UK. So Toast for Cheese, I think that works beautifully with this type of cheese.
Okay. I mean, should we move on to the next one?
Absolutely.
So, I mean, I've got a list. I mean, semi-soft cheeses. I mean, what are they, and how are they different from soft cheeses? Do they have that? Have they matured a bit more in time?
Yes, I understand. Yes, there are semi-firm cheeses, and I like to draw the distinction between soft cheeses. Soft cheeses will be spreadable with a knife. So when
Yes.
it's room temperature, not just when you took it out of the fridge, give it a few moments. But if it's spreadable with a knife at room temperature, I would say it's a soft cheese.
Mm-hmm.
If the cheese has a little bit of a bounce, and I actually have an example here, it's a full wheel, but I'll try to demo as much as I can.
Yeah.
This is a Tome de Savoie, which is a very classic French semi-firm cheese. And if I had it cut open and I pressed on the
Yeah.
piece of the cheese, it would bounce back.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, that's a semi-firm cheese when there is quite a good bounce back. Some semi-firm cheeses will be kind of tending towards the softness, but if they still keep the shape and still have the bounce, I would put them in the semi-firm category. Now, semi-firm cheeses can be made in different styles. There can be washed rind semi-firm cheeses like raclette, which everybody loves,
Yes.
or morbier. So those are bouncy, and there will be natural rinded ones like Tome de Savoie. So, and in terms of maturity, they are indeed matured a bit longer than soft cheeses.
So in a raclette, would you just go for the single cheese, or would you have a combination of maybe up to 3 cheeses?
I think the world is your oyster, really. I don't want to impose any rules on people. I think if you would like to try classic raclette first and have the classic raclette cheese without any flavor additives, do so, absolutely. But I found personally that some of my personal favorite raclette experiences have been with raclette that's been enriched with certain things. One of my fond memories of one of my visits to France was trying a smoked raclette. And generally, I'm not too fussed about smoked cheese,
Yes.
but that was transformational. So smoked raclette, definitely. Or a truffle raclette.
I mean, going into the smoked, I like only sort of not chemically balanced smoked cheeses. I like the real smoking.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Because then you get that naturally, and it isn't so intense. So now we move to the hard cheeses, which are my favorites because of the firm, dense, aged nature of that cheese, They're sort of very complex flavors. They're very bold, and they seem to, tingle the tongue. So if you could do so, your experience of hard cheeses, and if there are any sort of special types which actually sort of tingle the tongue that you could recommend.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, firm and hard cheeses are quite a massive category. There are so many different varieties. And before we kind of go into more detail, I'd like to draw a distinction, if I could, between firm and hard cheeses, because people usually kind of use those two words either interchangeably or slightly incorrectly. And for me, a firm cheese is the one that has a little bit of give, so less bounce than the semi-firm cheese, but it kind of jumps back a little bit. And the hard cheese is the one that you press into and there's no movement whatsoever, like a really hard Parmigiano, if you think about it. So that's the difference there. But when it comes to different families of firm cheeses, so we have cheddars, we have Alpine or mountain cheeses, we have Goudas, which can be also very exciting, and sometimes I feel they're sadly overlooked, but they're a great category. So there are all of these different recipes that we can use to make different firm cheeses, and it's important kind of to understand what you like if you want to go for a certain category, or if you're open-minded and want to try them all, just be mindful of that. So when it comes to cheddars, for instance, of course, since we're talking only about farmhouse and artisan ones, I'll say that that's the category that will be either sharp and tangy, or sometimes nutty, sometimes a little bit earthy. So that's the kind of flavors you would find in your cheddars. The more mature it is, the more concentrated the flavor will be, and you'll find all of those kind of punchy, almost tongue-biting flavors in cheddars. And of course, they will have the crumbly texture compared to, for instance, mountain cheeses.
Yes.
So if we look to France, to Switzerland, some regions of Italy, Germany, and so on, we will find all of the gorgeous Alpine wheels. So that's the cheeses that come in massive wheels. They used to roll them down the mountains. And the texture there will be much smoother. So in contrast to the cheddar, it won't be crumbly, it will be more smooth. And the flavors will be more predominantly nutty, kind of toasty, maybe caramelly, or even umami, kind of beefy. So those are the highlights of Alpine cheeses. And the more mature they get, the flavor gets more concentrated, of course, and they start to develop crystals. But that's actually quite uniform for all firm cheeses. Crystallization occurs with maturity.
I see.
So that's sorry?
I mean, with the Alpine cheeses, is that because of the actual grass that the animals eat is at a lot higher elevation, and the cheese is matured at a higher elevation than other cheeses, or is it purely down to the milk?
I mean, it's a combination of factors at all times. Milk does hugely affect the resultant flavor of the cheese. And actually, I remember one time I went to a tasting of Conte, and we had 5 different varieties of Conte. It was a very geeky tasting, just for real cheese geeks there. And we tasted Conte of different ages, and where the cows graze on different parts of the mountain. So one slope was facing east, the other one was facing west, and there was a difference there. So the milk absolutely influences the resultant flavor of the cheese, but also Alpine cheeses have a special recipe. So the recipe of making Alpine mountain cheeses is different to that of cheddars.
Yes.
And there's the cooking of the curd that occurs during the cheese making process. They reheat the curd, and that gives that sweetness, slight caramelization to the milk crystals. So yeah.
So, of course, we'll move on to probably the majority of people's favorites are the blue cheeses. So you've got, would you go for the sort of the blue mold or the green mold, or maybe a stronger pungent flavor? And then how do you know that those cheeses are no longer suitable to eat? Because of course,
Oh, I love this question. The blues, like you say, even in your question, can vary quite a lot, even in color of the mold. And I do find them varying in strength. So when people come into the shop, I do like to kind of engage with them and find out what kind of strength of blue they're looking for, because there will be those who don't like toe curling kind of strength of blue. So it's very important to figure that out, and it's important to bear in mind that there is a kind of a spectrum, if you will, of blue. So there will be milder ones, the ones in the middle, and the ones that are really, really strong and punchy. So it all comes down to the recipe. Essentially, there are different strains of blue mold that cheesemakers can use, and the length of the maturation process. So yeah, there's a lot of nuance. And in terms of choosing your blue, if you're open to all kind of strength of blue, I would be actually basing your particular cheese on the day on what kind of wine you're going to pair it with. Because if you get a mild to a medium blue, I wouldn't go for a very sweet wine. So I would either stick to red or slightly sweeter, more full-bodied red, rather than a dessert wine or kind of a port or anything like that. But the stronger the blue gets, so from Stilton and up to Roquefort, you really want to consider sweeter wines, because the saltiness of a strong blue needs to be balanced by sweetness of our dessert wine.
Okay, so I don't know if you do sort of the fresh cheeses, the sort of the goat's cheese, the ricotta or the feta, but can you tell me? I mean, these are sort of what I see is the people that are more on a diet, because I think naturally they don't have the contents of fat in there, and they still give you enough of a particular fresh flavor. So do you have any particular recommendations on fresh cheeses?
Fresh cheeses, we, like you say, we don't stock, because in order to be able to stock something really fresh, it needs to be locally made.
Yes.
The only really fresh cheese that we do import from Italy is burrata, and we do that only in the summer when it's made with lovely fresh milk. But burrata is exceptional. It does have kind of a richness to it. So I wouldn't call it necessarily a diet cheese as an indulgence. But when we think about fats and cheese and just cheese and wellness in general, I do have quite a kind of a strong philosophy on that. And personally, I think because cheese is good for you, I think it can be enjoyed throughout the year as long as it's in moderation. And of course, generally, I never seen anybody enjoy cheese not in moderation. Nobody eats a kilo of cheese in one sitting. I just don't believe that. Unless they overindulge on Christmas, and that's a separate story. But if you have a little bit of cheese, let's say every Saturday, a little piece of cheese, a couple of pieces of cheese and a glass of wine, that's moderation. That's absolutely fine. And I'm a living, breathing example of that. We have cheese every weekend in our house, so that is absolutely doable. But if you are conscious of the contents of your cheese, I would say soft goat's milk cheeses are lighter than the rest in terms of fat content. So because, first of all, soft cheeses have more moisture than solids, and moisture is really water. That's what makes them lighter. And goat's milk, compared to sheep's and cow's milk, has smaller fat globules, and there's just less fat in there in general. Therefore, if you want to opt for lighter cheeses, soft goat milk cheeses are your possibly easier way to go. And then other cheeses can be made with skimmed milk. So for instance, this Tome de Savoie that I showed earlier, this is actually made with a semi-skimmed milk. So
Yes,
this is a lighter option. Or Parmigiano Reggiano. Parmigiano Reggiano is made with semi-skimmed milk as well. So as a result, it's a lighter option.
yes. So do you store washed rind cheeses?
Absolutely.
So, I mean, these sort of improve the aging and lock in more pungent and rich aroma. So do you have any particular recommendations on those particular cheeses?
Absolutely. I actually have an example with me right here. So this is the famous Epoisse. Some of you may have tried it. If you haven't, it's an experience. Absolutely do so. So washed rind cheeses are a delicious category of soft and semi-firm cheeses. They are washed with a brine on the outside during maturation, and that creates the family. The washing makes them orangey or pinkish on the outside because it grows a special bacterium called B. linens. And not only are they colorful, they're also quite aromatic. So all of these washed rind cheeses are stinky, smelly, farmyardy, whatever you want to call them, but we love them. And yes, Epoisse is one of those ones I would absolutely recommend trying. It's very, very delicious, gooey, aromatic. Another one of my personal favorites is Münster, or Munster, they say in France. And that's just an absolutely delicious thing as well. Slightly less runny, but very aromatic as well. And if I'm thinking of British washed rind cheeses, what would I recommend there? We stock Maida Vale, which is a lovely one from Berkshire, and it's made with a Jersey cow's milk, so it has an extra richness to it. So definitely worth a try.
So going back to the Alpine cheeses, which particular Alpine locations are the best? Is it potentially down to the process, or is it down to the relevant variations in height in those particular regions?
Alpine cheeses, I have to say, have a special place in my heart. I do love my Alpine cheeses. I mean, Switzerland is probably the epicenter of all the Alpine cheeses. And of course, I've mentioned other countries that produce Alpine cheese as well. I didn't mention Austria. There's obviously Alps there as well. Alpine cheeses, what makes them special? Well, first of all, those that are made in the Alps, I would say, are even more special than the ones that are made in the valley, because as you alluded to, the flora in the Alps, it's absolutely the best diet that any cow can dream of in the world. Grass, flowers, crystal clear water, all of that goes into their diet, into their milk, and comes out as flavorsome, complex milk that goes into cheese, and it's just the best. In Switzerland, it's called white gold, the Swiss milk. So yes, the cheeses that are made, especially in the Alps, and they do have a lot of those in Switzerland. Some of my absolute favorites are Letiva, which is a very traditional Gruyere, and Appenzeller. So I have a very special place in my heart for those two cheeses especially, but then a lot of them are just magical. Letiva guys, they are just so dedicated to the tradition of making that Alpine cheese. They only make it in the summer from May to end of September, and they graze their cows up the slopes gently where cows always have green pasture, and they make cheese every day. It's just an idyllic lifestyle and a fantastic cheese.
So we move on to smoked cheeses. I mean, I spend a lot of my time smoking meats, so I know the different. I mean, I traditionally do it with a lot of different variations on wood. So I suppose, what is your knowledge on how the cheeses are smoked, and what are the relevant types of recipes to actually smoke particular cheeses? What would they be?
Well, I agree with you that to get the best flavor, cheeses, same as other products, need to be smoked naturally. So as long as that happens, I'm quite happy to try those cheeses. We don't do too many smoked cheeses because, I mean, there are so many other delicious types. But as we know that there are certain people who want to explore smoked cheeses, we do stock two at the moment. And one is the cheddar, and it's really quite a punchy one. So it's an Oakwood smoked cheddar. Natural wood chips, obviously, and it gives it a really, really deep smoky flavor. And then another one we do is an Ainster. It's called Ainster, and it's a Cheshire style cheese, so a smaller crumble, and it's smoked very, very elegantly over a real wood as well. I believe. No, I'm not going to tell you what they use, but it's a more elegant. Lighter smoke and a lighter flavor of cheese. So it's for those who kind of want just an elegant touch of smokiness. So we have that. But yeah, smoking has to be done correctly and in a balanced way.
So let's move on to sort of preparing the food. You know, how do you, what is the best way of storing cheeses which you may want to have you have all your cheese ready for a party in a week, and then how do you actually have the cheese at the best consistency once you transfer it from the fridge to the table?
I think I'm going to try to answer a couple of questions here because you touched on those things. First of all, the storage of cheese, I think, is important before we even get to the enjoyment part. So when you get your cheeses from a cheesemonger, please put them in the fridge, is what we usually say to our customers. Because once the integrity of the cheese is broken, so once it's not a full wheel, it's no longer maturing, it's deteriorating. So it needs to be refrigerated. It needs to be kept under 6 degrees, and ideally keep your cheese in the vegetable compartment of the fridge, away from drafts, away from other strong smells. If you can keep it wrapped in cheese paper that comes in, that's the best. I like duplex paper that has 2 layers. It keeps the cheeses for longer, or you can use foil alternatively. And when you are ready to enjoy your cheese, take them out of the fridge. If you're presenting them as a whole wedge, obviously use the wedge. If you use it just a little bit, cut a little bit off, put the rest in the fridge. And what we do at home is we present them on whatever board we're using. I cut it about half an hour before we're going to enjoy the cheeses to let them come to room temperature. Usually half an hour to an hour is what you need, depending on the temperature of the room. And a very important step is once I've presented my board, once I've cut them all, cover them with something. I do have a fancy cloche at home. If you don't, not to worry, you can cover it with a towel, a piece of foil, something, and that serves 2 purposes. First of all, our cheeses are not losing their aroma and they're not drying out, because part of the flavor is the aroma. And second, of course, in the summer, there can be all sorts of flying objects, flies, bugs. You want to protect your cheeses from that as well.
So you don't need any special knives. You know, you're not going to contaminate the cheese if you're using a plastic knife or a metal knife or some sort of. I mean, you wouldn't get a special cheese cutter or cheese grater or what have you. You just use your conventional utensils.
Well, it really depends. It depends on what your purpose is and what the nature of the occasion is. Let's say you're doing a cheese board for a party of people and you're presenting your cheeses on the cheese board as wedges, and people will be helping themselves. In that case, I would recommend actually having a knife for each cheese, so there is no cross-contamination of flavors and kind of textures. So for that reason, I would have separate knives. In terms of cutting cheeses for your cheese board, you can certainly use just a kitchen knife. I like a nice big one, nice and sharp, but that only works for firm cheeses. What you have to bear in mind with soft and blue cheeses, they will stick to the knife. So if you cut soft cheeses or blue cheeses with a knife, they will stick. So personally, I use a wire. And a wire is, or in French, they're called liers. It doesn't have to be like a big machine we use in the shop. It can just come with a little handle and there's a wire on the bottom. And that's really the best. It really prevents any sticking, any loss of cheese, things like that. So if you can get your hands on a wire, that's the best.
So moving towards the cheeses in general, what are your customer favorites at the moment at the start of the year?
Oh gosh, at the start of the year, I would say Vacheron Mont d'Or, as we're still in the winter now, because its season is in the winter. People are definitely embracing Vacheron Mont d'Or and its deliciousness, and because it's so amazing baked and gooey, poured over potatoes, that's definitely the season for it. And raclette. And we do classic raclette and truffle raclette here. So those are definitely very popular. But in general, because we're based in Scotland, one of our absolute best sellers of all times is Mull cheddar. And that's every year pretty much when we check our stats, Mull cheddar comes out the winner. And it's a fabulous cheese. I mean, if you haven't tried it before, it's definitely a must.
And then it's basically the same question for Easter and Christmas. I mean, is there any variation on what people buy at those particular times of the year?
I mean, Easter is funny, isn't it? Because it can fall at different times. It can be March, it can be April. I think it can even be May sometimes. So yeah, depending on where it falls, really. But I would say my feeling is that people do go for classics a lot, because if they entertain, they want to stay on the safe side. So those 5 favorites that we always have good demand for, which is Brie de Meaux or Baron Bigod, which is the English Brie style cheese. We get a lot of demand for Isle of Mull cheddar or alternative cheddars. Comté, which is the French classic, and Stilton or Gorgonzola Dolce. So those go absolutely at all times, but especially I would say at Easter and Christmas. The amount of Stilton that we sell is obviously a little bit ridiculous, but it's because it's so popular.
And I suppose sometimes it's a bit hard to come to a place like yourself and actually know how much cheese to actually purchase. You say, well, how much do you need? Well, you know, I don't know whether I'm going to like it. You know, do I, you know, what is the normal? I mean, it's difficult to tell, but what would you suggest that the normal amount of cheese per person would be when you're purchasing cheese?
Well, how long is a piece of string, some might say, right? It really depends. And I always want to say to people, oh, I don't really know how hungry or greedy your guests are. You know, it's a really hard thing to judge. But if I were trying to give like a general rule of thumb advice, I would go maybe for 4 to 8 people, a 200-gram wedge is a good amount. But bear in mind, when you're in a specialist cheese shop, you can also have a visual kind of look at the cheese and say, that looks like a good amount. Because at the end of the day, when you're presenting it at home, you don't want it to look too sad and too kind of skimpy. So have a look and visually say, yes, that's a good amount. Let's cut there. I generally wouldn't say go for any less than 200 grams. But if, like you say, somebody's coming and shopping just for themselves, and they're not sure whether they're going to enjoy this cheese, they've never had it before, the good news is that we can sell 100 grams. The minimum here is 100 grams. So if you're not sure, go for 100 and then go from there.
And then would you, I mean, I always have a problem whether I should get a wheel, because a lot of the times I don't actually know when I'm going to be attempting to eat that. Is it better to get a wheel if you're thinking that, you'll be having you'll be starting eating that in 7 to 14 days? Because if you get a little piece, it stopped actually maturing. So
I mean, it depends on the cheese.
Yes.
It really depends on the cheese. I mean, some cheeses do come as a whole thing. So, for instance, soft cheeses can often come as a whole thing, in which case you can get the whole thing, and you will get the whole thing because we don't really cut these. Whereas with firm and semi-firm even cheeses, they are big. So for personal consumption, this is way too much. This is about kilos, so way too much. Yes. In terms of, actually, I think what your question really comes down to is how long you can keep cheese. And because there are so many different varieties, the answer can be very long. But if I try to make it kind of more condensed and more like a rule of thumb, I would say soft and blue cheeses, because they have a fair bit of moisture, I would give them up to 2 weeks in the fridge. But I'm talking about those that have been cut. So if you think of Brie Meaux that was cut from the wheel, 2 weeks maximum, but please keep it in the fridge. But if we have something like a Cosanella, which comes as a whole thing, it may arrive to us with a longer shelf life, maybe 4 weeks, which is really long in farmhouse and artisan cheese. They're usually very short. In that case, if you don't cut this cheese and it has a date printed on it, you can keep it uncut in your fridge for a bit longer, and it will ripen. It will ripen a bit more. With firm cheeses, the general rule of thumb is that we would keep them for up to a month, tops. Maybe sometimes a bit longer, depends again on how you keep it. But there is a caveat to that. They will likely grow mold on open surfaces. So don't expect your piece of, for instance, Mull cheddar or your Conte to be pristine and just the same a month after you put it in the fridge. It will grow molds, and that's in our duplex paper. But if you wrapped it in a more porous something like a wax paper, it will probably dry out in a month. So there's a lot of nuance to that. But to avoid any complications and any confusion, I would just say enjoy your cheeses as soon as you get them. Don't get too much. Just get what you need, enjoy them, and come back for more.
So do you have any experience of selling the cheeses as a wedding centerpiece? A lot of people are avoiding, having a wedding cake in 4 cheeses. So what's your experience in that area?
We do offer wedding cheesecakes on our website, so we deliver them nationwide. Wedding cheesecakes are fascinating, and they're definitely more trendy now than ever. People opt either for them as a standalone option or in addition to their traditional cake.
Yes.
With my cheesecakes, the ones that we have kind of pre-made or pre-thought on our website, I aim for a balance of different textures and styles and milks. I want to offer variety as much as possible. But bearing in mind, not all cheeses will be usable in the cheesecake. For instance, if we think of a lovely Conte, which I love with all my heart, it's a 40-kilo piece of cheese. That would be a massive cheesecake. So unfortunately we can't use that, but the ones that I've created are definitely aimed for variety, and I wanted to represent what's possible with different styles.
So we're winding up now, so is there anything that we haven't covered that you'd like to talk about?
I think the only thing maybe we could also add is that how to create a cheese board. Maybe if I could give a few tips on that. So we do get asked that quite a lot, and our customers appreciate our guidance. So I would say a cheese board for yourself or for a special occasion should have at least 3 cheeses.
Yes.
Under 3, it's a little bit skimpy, let's put it this way. 3 is good, 4 is very good,
Yes.
5 is excellent. Over 5, it's completely your choice. Of course, you can go for 12 if you want, but I think the complexity and the kind of variety can be getting lost after 6. So 3 to 4 to 5. And what you want to do is to, again, think variety, do different milks, cow, sheep, and goats, do different textures, soft, semi-firm, firm, hard, blue.
Yes.
So do that. If you can do different styles, even within your firms, cheddars, alpines, goudas, all of that good stuff. So think variety. And another thing I would say, if you want to pair them all to the wine, if you have a special wine, perhaps start with that in mind before you jump into selecting the cheeses, because that could guide your kind of selections there. And of course, the final piece is, if you're not sure at all where to start, go and speak to a cheesemonger. We are always here to help you. We are on hand. That's why we're here. We would like to guide you.
So as a final question, I mean, if you could tell us all the details about where we can get your cheeses, either online or physically.
So we are based in Scotland. Our main store is in Haddington, which is just south of Edinburgh. Or if you're traveling from England, it's just off A1, very conveniently located. Pop in, visit us. And the second store is in North Berwick, which is a coastal town here in East Lothian. Very popular in the summer, absolutely worth a visit. So that's our 2 stores. And the online store is at thecheeselady.co.uk. What I'd like to say, if you are visiting our website, do use the filters that are available in the cheese section especially, and they will help you to filter cheeses down by milk, by texture, but by all of those things that we discussed, and help you create a really beautiful cheese board. And if you're completely not sure, we also have a selections section on the website, and that's where I put all my knowledge together and created balanced cheese boards, which have the variety that we discussed, and they also come with condiments. And if you'd like to shop on our website, Martin and I discussed, and I'd like to offer your listeners a special discount that they can use on the website. So if you use code Martin10, you would get 10% off the cheeses.
And when they're ordering these cheeses, do they get free delivery over a certain amount that they're spending?
Yes, there will be free delivery for orders over £50.
So thank you very much for your time. The cheese lady. I hope that the listeners now, when they go into selecting their cheeses or speaking to a cheesemonger, it's a lot easier for them to do that.
I really hope so. Thank you so much, Martin, for having me. I hope your listeners got a lot of value from our conversation.
Yeah.